Good afternoon. I feel incredibly illegitimate here following this incredible panel. So please forgive my redundancy. My predecessor, Jim Moran, used to say that everything's been said, but it hasn't been said by everybody. So, I come as a humble business person. I'm glad to say somebody mentioned a $200 million business. That's our little family automobile business, which I've done. Our 42nd anniversary is on Saturday. And it's someplace where I learned up close and personal day after day the incredible power of women in business. But first, I come from a family of very strong women. My grandmother, who is my closest friend and greatest inspiration, was one of two women to graduate from Berkeley in 1915. She started changing the sheets in the dorms and ended up the back way in. And had 50 years in the federal government and lived in 98 and was constantly pushing us to be leaders. My mother, all kinds of things are named after her in Northern Virginia because one of my sisters had an intellectual disability. And my mom was out there leading every organization that there could be. My wife, many of you know, is the strongest person I know. And I have three wonderful daughters, sort of testament to the fact that the best men on women's issues are the fathers of daughters. We went to Switzerland in the summer of 2009 as ambassador, and one of the previous U.S. ambassadors sent me a list of the 167 most important people in Switzerland, and there was not a single woman on the list. We would see little brochures of women in corporate leadership in Switzerland, and the first two things you learn about them was if they were married and how many children they had, which, by the way, never showed up if you were a male leader. And my wife, I raised the money, she did everything else, put together bilateral commissions the years we were there with about 80 important Swiss women in business and government and society and important women from the United States to try to overcome these glass ceilings in both countries. By the way, Switzerland didn't give women the right to vote federally until 1972. And in the last canton, Appenzell-Innerrhoden, until 1991 on a voice vote. So there was a huge problem there. But we also realized there was a huge problem here. After the 4 years there, in which we spent a lot of time working on quotas for women on boards and things like that, I returned pleading with President Obama for another cushy government job, and they said no. So I went back to the card business. I went sackcloth and ashes to my little brother, and he gave me responsibility for our Route 1 store, Volvo Kia Subaru. So I go in there, and there's 17 salesmen. Emphasize 17 salesmen, not a single saleswoman. This is the same month that the Wall Street Journal came out with the report that 80% of the car buying decisions in America are made by women. And just total craziness. So I made my number one goal there to try to get to 50-50. Because every time we would hire a woman salesperson, she would knock it out of the park, just kill the other people. The good news now is my daughter Stephanie is the general manager of that store. My sister Weedy has been CFO of the enterprise for these 20 years. But I keep coming back to the reality that not every corporation is a family business. So inspired by my wife, we have taken on, as a freshman Democrat in the House, the idea of trying to be the strongest advocate for women in business leadership. So this is almost a rejection of the fairness argument. Not that fairness isn't important, but that fairness doesn't change a lot of people's minds, and it certainly doesn't drive votes in a Republican-controlled House and Senate. Instead, we're just focusing solely on the economic argument for women in leadership. So quickly, three things: the statistics, the culture, and some of the resources. You probably know the statistics, but forgive me, I'll do them fast. Since 1970, 25% of the increase in GDP in America is directly related to women in the workforce, the influx of women at all levels. We find that a significant percentage, I can't track down the exact percentage, of the productivity gains are from women in the workforce. I had lunch with a fellow member of Congress who asked not to be named, but an important CEO, who asked me, he said, why would I ever hire a 55-year-old man over a 55-year-old woman? I can see it at 25 when the men are stronger, but at 55 it makes no sense whatsoever. That the women are going to be better in almost every respect. Catalyst, who many of you know about, found in their 2014 census that we're only at 47% of the labor force in women, but 19% of corporate board members for S&P 500 companies. McKinsey, in their 2007 study, found that corporations with 2 or more women on the board perform better in almost every area of financial performance. Oklahoma State University, you notice I'm quoting all these liberal organizations. Oklahoma State, in their study, Corporate Governance, Board Diversity, and Firm Performance, found that gender diversity on boards is associated with improved financial value. There are many, many of these. Credit Suisse, in their 2012 study, 2,000 corporations worldwide, found that financial performance as measured by stock value was significantly better in boards with 2 or more women as opposed to boards with no women. Bain, Pepperdine, basically the research is clear. Everywhere you look, corporations with more women on boards and more women in leadership make more money. It's a simple economic argument. You know, the World Economic Forum in Davos does a metric every year, a gender ranking of nations. We were always top 10. This last year, we were number 20. So we're definitely not keeping up. Number 2, the culture. Some on my economic populist staff, I'm a Democrat, have been giving me a hard time about pushing for women on boards because they say, Don, you're only talking about like 1 woman in 1,000, right, who's going to be on a board, or maybe 1 woman in 100. What about all the rest of the women? And they point to our good liberal democratic legislative agenda: paid family and medical leave, paid sick leave, change in the overtime rules, child care tax credits, equal pay. All these things that I would like to pass but are never going to pass in this Congress, and they may be some years away. The cool part culturally is that corporations with 2 or more women on the board, these things begin to happen naturally within the corporations. They happen because they have women in leadership, not because they're mandated by the federal government or the state government. So if you have a liberal bias in you and you want to see more of these economic equity things, the best way to do it is to put women in leadership on these boards. Finally, the resources. You all know about the 30% Club, I hope. It's done wonderfully in the UK. As of 3 weeks ago, led by Warren Buffett and Mike Bloomberg and others, it had 49 major US corporations on their way to 500. It's a very good thing. Here in the metro area with the Leadership Foundry, that's focused effort to train women to be boards. I'm going to take a copy of the book home about how to be a good woman on the board and how to get there. We have, on the Hill, have done 3 things. They mentioned the Men for Women Caucus. This is essentially inspired by Nicholas Kristof, who gets more attention as a man writing about women's issue than women ever do writing about women's issue. So we say if we can put together a caucus of men, bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, who are fighting for women's issue, it will maybe have not more credibility, but additional credibility. A couple of months ago, I introduced a resolution. It was interesting talking about CalPERS. We had a wonderful group of women private equity executives come and meet with me at the Library of Congress. And one of their great ideas is that with the evolution of gender lens funds, which there are half a dozen right now in America at least, index funds put together of companies that have women in leadership, why not make those available in the 401k that serves federal employees? The Thrift Savings Plan, 7 million participants, military, civilian, retired, and active duty, $380 billion in assets. The legislation is not passed yet, and it may be a while before we get there. But we've laid the marker that we want to make sure that gender lens funds are a legitimate use of retirement assets. And finally, we have a resolution that I'm working on every day, a House Joint Resolution that simply cites these many, many studies and encouraging American corporations, American companies to put women in leadership. And the other co-sponsor is Tom Emmer, a Republican from Minnesota. I spent last night talking to many Republican women members of Congress, trying to get them to sign up. And we hope to have a couple of hundred members on board before we go for a vote. You just declare a political will of America that this is the right thing to do. I was talking yesterday with Wes Bush, who's the CEO and chairman of Northrop Grumman, about the 30% Club and trying to make him number 50. And he pointed out they already had 2 women on boards, which is good, but that for him, even more important was to have women in executive leadership. It was great to have the board members a couple times a year, but to have women senior vice presidents, women CEOs, every day there, changing the culture, helping make the company more profitable, better sustainable culture was what we really needed to do. So I will do my small part on the Hill, and I thank you all that you do in your businesses each and every day, and thanks for the good example.